Hello, welcome to Introduction to Psychology, Week 2. Today we're going to be talking about the biology of behavior. So, in order to understand the biology of behavior or all behavior in general, remember we're always going to take a biopsychosocial approach. Because again, are our genetics, our genes associated with our personality and the way we behave? Absolutely. Is the structure of the brain and our cognitions, our thoughts associated with the way we behave? Absolutely. And is the social context, the systems that are in place, the social structures, our culture, our common way of life, the neighborhood we grew up in, our parents. Does that all influence the way we think? Of course, So again, it's a biopsychosocial process and it goes back and forth. Our genetics influence our brain, which influence our cognitions, which influence our social behavior. The environment influences the brain structure and your thoughts, which then influence your genes and the gene expression, hence epigenetics. So again, it's a cyclical process. So, how does biology influence brain structure, cognitions, emotions, and behavior? That's kind of the beginning where we're going to start really looking at the mind body connection, the mind body environment connection. All right, here we go. So, biology, behavior, and the mind. Again, biopsychosocial. Think about your biological influences, your shared genetics with your parents and your siblings, for example, the psychological influences, the brain structure and your cognition. Again, sociocultural influences, your gender role, because, if you identify as a female, how have you been socialized to act because you identify as a female, for example. So these are the things we're going to be thinking about throughout this entire class. And then the final chapter of the book, when it comes to disorders, this is what we're going to look at. You need a biopsychosocial approach to being able to understand psychological disorders, okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about for biology of psychology is we're going to look at the two different systems of communication the body uses. The body has the nervous system, which uses neurons, and then the endocrine system, which uses hormones in the bloodstream. Okay? So a neuron is a nerve cell. So is a neuron a cell? Absolutely. It's the same exact thing. The way our minds work is that one neuron communicates with another neuron by releasing neurotransmitters after an potential has been triggered, sending a signal down your axon. We're about to put all that together, okay? Um, so again, first we're looking at the nervous system. We're looking at the brain and spinal cord, and then we're looking at the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system. All these nerves that are running through your body. So on the next slide, I have a picture of it, of the body and the nervous system, and so I'm going to go back and forth a little bit to give you guys an idea. But again, a neuron is the basic building block of the nervous system. Okay, and all a neuron is a cell, and basically all our body is cells communicating with each other one way or another. Okay, and then we're going to finalize this chapter by talking about how the nervous system and the endocrine system communicate with each other. Okay, so first and foremost, the contents of the neuron. So this is the inside of a cell. Just imagine a circle around this, and this is just a neuron cell. So here's how it works, right? One cell communicates with another cell by releasing neurotransmitters. So one neuron releases neurotransmitters, which then get received by these dendrites. When information is received by the dendrites, enough information to trigger an action potential, the cell body becomes slightly less electrically negative, sends a signal down the axon to the axon terminal buttons. And here at the terminal buttons is where neurotransmitters are then released and then absorbed by the next dendrites of the next neuron. So again, information comes into the neuron through the dendrites. When enough information's come in, it stimulates the cell body firing an action potential, which releases an electrical signal down the axon, which tells these axon terminals to release neurotransmitters. Okay? So the cell body is connected to the dendrites. The dendrites, again, up here on the top, they receive information, okay? When they receive information, it triggers the cell body to send an electrical signal down the axon, which passes messages to the terminal branches where neurotransmitters are released. They then cross the synapse and are absorbed by the dendrites of the next neuron. The myelin sheath, this coating right here is your myelin sheath, okay? This is, just imagine a telephone cable wire. As you're driving on the road, you got all those telephone cable wires, and really those are just insulators. So the myelin sheath is what insulates this here so that electrical signals don't whip off. So there are some neurological disorders, for example, when you lose this myelin sheath, and what happens is you can't move your left leg because as your brain is triggering neurons from your brain all the way to your leg to move, the electrical signals are flying out right here because this myelin sheath has eroded. So that's the case with multiple sclerosis is the signal is not being transmitted all the way from the brain to the body and the body back to the brain because the myelin sheath that is wrapping around your axon is being eroded over time. So just imagine a telephone wire where the outer edges have been eroded over time, and then that electricity is just flying out of the telephone wire, for example. It's the same exact principle, okay? And then neurotransmitters, this is what it's really all about because this is the information. Okay, neurotransmitters are simply chemical messengers that go from the terminal buttons of one neuron and are absorbed by the dendrites of the next. So again, this whole process at first is going to seem a little overwhelming. Hence, you've already read your book. You're going to watch the neuron video that I have attached to the next slide. You're going to watch this very carefully, and then you'll understand it a little bit better. Okay. So I wrote it all out here for you really easily. So again, information is taken in by the dendrites, which then stimulates the cell body. It gets passed along the axon through the terminal branches or the terminal buds to another neuron. Okay? And this video right here, it's a link. I want you guys to watch this video. If I play this video for you during the lecture, you're not going to be able to hear it. So again, you guys need to watch that on your own time. But that's a quick video about how neurons work. Okay, so again, everything is just neurons communicating with other neurons. So all of your memories, all your knowledge, all of that stored information, your personality, who you are, all your sense of all of that really is just one neuron releasing neurotransmitters and talking to another neuron, which is absolutely amazing. That your memories are nothing more than neurons releasing neurotransmitters. And when we get a little bit deeper into memory and stuff, this is really going to blow your mind. But what I really need you guys to first understand is what does the inside of a neuron look like? Again, this is it. Information is absorbed by the dendrites, which then stimulates the cell body to release an electrical signal down the axon and out the axon terminal buttons. Okay? So this is a picture of the action potential, and your book does a great job of covering it. But again, once enough neurotransmitters or enough stimulus reaches those dendrites, then the cell body becomes slightly less electrically negative. Okay, and they call this process the depolarization. Okay, it then fires an electrical signal down the axon. But again, neurons, all of them have to reset after they've fired neurotransmitters. And the best way to get a feel of this is to think about when someone is taking a picture in front of your face, right? So let's say someone put a camera with a flash bulb right in front of your eyes and they push the button, and all of a sudden you can't see it all. That's because all the neurons in your eyes have been stimulated, okay? They've all released their signal and now they have to reset. This period of resetting is called the refractory period, and then the neuron can then be used again. So a neuron releases a neurotransmitters, resets, and then can release more neurotransmitters. Okay? And that's a little bit deep with the biology, I know. But the things that's most important for you guys is where is information taken in? Through the dendrites. Okay? Then the cell body becomes slightly less electrically negative when it receives enough stimulus, which then sends an information down the axon, and then its neurotransmitters are then released to talk to the next neuron through the terminal buttons. Okay, so again, here's just a bigger picture of it for you, just so you guys can really get a feel. Okay, again, once enough neurotransmitters are absorbed by one neuron, it then fires an electrical signal, then it has to reset before it can fire another electrical signal and talk again. Okay, so this is a really in detailed picture of what the end of one neuron looks like and the beginning of another neuron looks like. So again, neurons communicate with each other. So when this neuron wants to talk to this neuron, it releases neurotransmitters through the synapse, this gap between two neurons, okay? Here are these receptors. These are your dendrites. This is where the information is received. Once enough information and enough of these dendrites have been stimulated, it then triggers an action potential in the cell body here to release an electrical signal down the axon and then to release more neurotransmitters here to the next one. And in this way, just imagine a line of neurons talking to each other. One gets stimulated, releases neurotransmitters, absorbed by the next. That then stimulates that one, which then triggers the next. I like to think about it like a car collision, but they're not actually touching, hence this synaptic gap. But one car crashes into one car, the car that was in front of it then crashes it into the next car, and just think about a line of cars crashing into each other. But instead of actually crashing, they're just releasing neurotransmitters across the synaptic gap, okay? So this is the picture of your nervous system itself. Okay, so the brain and spinal cord are your central nervous system. All of this blue is the peripheral nervous system. So, what are the two parts of the nervous system? This is always a quiz question. The central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system. All of these nerve endings, okay? So, the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, peripheral nervous system, these are all the other sensory and motor neurons that run down your nerves. And the nerves are nothing more than bundles of axons, okay? So again, nerves are bundles of axons. This is where electrical signals can pass from the brain down and then from your hands, for example, back up to the brain, okay? So you have sensory or afferent neurons. These carry information from the body's tissues to the brain. And then you have motor neurons that carry neurons from the brain out to the body. Okay, so sensory go from out here to the brain, and then motor goes from the brain and out. And then you have interneurons. These are the neurons that just communicate within the brain and spinal cord. So there's three types of neurons: sensory, motor, inter. Sensory goes from your body to the brain, motor from the brain to the body, and then inter just talks inside of your brain. Okay? The peripheral nervous system, for example, can be subdivided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, which I have a little bit of a breakdown right here for you. Again, this is the central nervous system. This is the peripheral. So the peripheral can then be subdivided into somatic and autonomic. The somatic can then be, broken down into all of this. So that's a little bit more than I need you guys to memorize for this class. Of course, we get way deep into this in some of the other classes, but for now, what's the two parts of the nervous system? The central and the peripheral are pretty good. Okay? So the endocrine system is another way that the body communicates. Again, you have two communication methods: one, the nervous system, and two, the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a much slower form of communication because the information has to travel up through the bloodstream to the brain before the information can be taken in. Whereas the brain has almost instantaneous reaction times, the body's endocrine system is a lot more slow. So, the way the endocrine system works: your glands in your body release chemicals called hormones, okay? A hormone is just like a neurotransmitter. They're both just chemical signals, ways the body and the mind communicate with each other. So the endocrine system, your glands release hormones to talk to the brain. So for example, when your body is hungry, the gland in your body then releases hormones which travel up the bloodstream into the brain to tell your brain that you're hungry. Then your brain's nervous system then kicks in and sends signals down to your body to say, go out and get food. And this same process works for all of the basics. Okay, when you want sex, your glands release hormones. Okay, and again, it's this entire process of your mind communicating with your body and your body communicating with your mind. So again, what are the two communication systems? Nervous system and endocrine system. Obviously, the endocrine system is much more the medical doctor side and the anatomy and physiology side, and the nervous system seems more psychological side. But again, these two all work together. Hence the idea of physical and mental health. It's all a big giant package. You can't take one without the other. But your body has the power to increase your heart rate and blood pressure in response to environmental cues, for example. Um, so again, the brain works by your neurons releasing neurotransmitters. The endocrine system works by your glands releasing hormones. Essentially, it's the same thing. It's just your body's way of communicating. Okay? So, there are a couple tools that we use to study the brain. We can do EEGs, which measure electrical waves of activity, MEGs, measuring magnetic fields, because all things with mass have magnetic fields, PET scans, looking at radioactivity, MRI, measuring magnetic fields and radio waves, fMRI to look at blood flow. So there's a lot of tools. However, our technology is not as good as it hopefully will be in the future. But the more advanced our technology gets, the more we're able to understand what parts of the brain do what. But still, there's a lot of questions. Like, no one knows for sure specifically where the association areas are in your brain, but we are learning over time. Neurogenesis is this idea that the brain can repair itself and also produce neurons. The structure of the brain is next. So, when we think about the structure of the brain, we have to think about it in three parts. You got your old brain. That's the brain stem, okay, the medulla, the thalamus, the oldest parts of your brain, responsible for things like breathing and heartbeat. And these are down here, okay? Your old part of your brain. In the middle is the limbic system, where you start to really get into the emotion centers, for example. And then on the outer cortex, these are what really makes us human. We have four lobes that are dedicated to things like math and language and colors and all of that kind of stuff is all built into our cortex here on the edge. Okay, so again, what's the oldest part of the brain? The brain stem, the medulla, the thalamus. They control the most important parts of your body. Okay, this is the first part of our brain that evolved over the millennia of human evolution. The second part of our brain that evolved is the limbic system. So again, here's your old brain, the brain stem, the medulla, and the thalamus, and then surrounding this is the limbic system. Okay, this is responsible again for a lot of these emotions like aggression and fear, regulating certain areas of the body, for example, and also the beginning of our memories. Because again, memories then compound into knowledge, which then gets interpreted by our outer cortexes here. So again, what's the oldest part of the brain? The inner brain here, the brain stem, medulla, thalamus. Then you have your middle part of your brain, the limbic system. And then the part that really makes us human, this outer part of our brain, the gray, mushy, maze looking area part of our brain, the cerebral cortex, okay? The outer part of your brain is divided into two hemispheres. You have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. In between these two hemispheres, basically going down the middle of your brain, right here, is called the corpus callosum. And this again is just a bunch of nerves, axons, so that your left brain can then communicate with your right brain, okay? So it's a bit of a trick question, but how many lobes of the brain do we have? There are four different types of lobes in our brain. However, there are eight total lobes because you have four lobes on each part of your brain. So the lobes, frontal, olfactory, temporal, parietal, occipital, these you have on both sides of your brain. Okay? So here's what that kind of looks like. Okay? So your brain is split. You have four lobes on each side of your brain, and each one of these lobes is responsible for something pretty specific. However, it's a little bit unknown because within each of these lobes are association areas that are responsible for very specific stuff, but it's hard to really measure where that's happening with the exception of looking at like brain activity and things to see what's happening when you're doing math. But like when you do math, for example, that kind of stuff like starts to light up in certain areas of your brain. Music might be back here, colors back here. This part of your brain will light up when you're doing math. This part of your brain will light up when you're doing language and things like that. So, depending on the lobe that you're talking about, depending on the type of task that you're engaging in, that's associated with which areas of your brain light up. So, the frontal lobe, this is more responsible for speaking, muscles, plans, and judgment. Your parietal lobe is more like body movements, things like that, balance. Your occipital lobe is for your eyes. So information from your eyes goes to the occipital lobe, which then interprets what it is you're seeing. And then your temporal lobe for your ears, okay? And then again, these association areas are found in all of these lobes. In these outer part of your brain, the latest part of the human brain to develop is this outer cortex. Okay, and this is the things that really make you uniquely human. So again, you have your inner brain, the old part of your brain, the brain stem surrounded by the limbic system, the middle part of your brain, which is then surrounded by the cortex, which contains all those association areas that make you uniquely human, and also the lobes that are responsible for higher level executive functioning. So again, all of your executive functioning, reflection, the ability to step outside the box, that's this outer part of your area, okay? So again, when you're looking at the approaches to psychology, we're going to take a biopsychosocial approach to this class. We're going to look at the nature-nurture debate, asking questions like how are genes associated with your, how you act? How's the brain structure, neurons firing? How's your body, the hormones being released? How is that associated with the way you behave? Who's actually driving the car is something we're going to look at when we get into consciousness, but your body is constantly releasing hormones to tell your brain and you to go out and do stuff. So, how much of you is influenced by your body releasing hormones, and how much of you is influenced by your cognitions, the way you interpret information, and then how much of you is influenced by the social context? Okay? What we find is when you look at genetics, a lot of associations between genetics and personality come about, especially when it comes to the twin studies. But, that doesn't mean you're always 100% going to turn out like that person. It just means that we have these genetic associations, these genetic tendencies to end up somehow like this. So, again, how much of your parents do you end up like? How much of your siblings do you end up like? How much of your peers do you end up like? Are some pretty incredible questions. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Please email with any questions.